Hello, and welcome to the planet's memory, a quiet corner where deep time speaks softly, and curiosity is allowed to drift, slowly, without needing to arrive anywhere at all. Tonight, we're going to begin not with answers, but with a question that's older than memory, and perhaps older than us. A question that hums like an echo through layers of stone and salt and silence. What if we're not the first to wonder? Before we dive in, let yourself settle. Wherever you are, tucked into bed, staring at the ceiling, or watching soft shadows move across the wall, take a moment to let your thoughts uncoil. And if you find comfort in this slow, steady unfolding of ideas, feel free to leave a like or subscribe. It helps this little stream of calm find others who may need it, too. Here, nothing rushes, nothing shouts, and nothing is ever too much. Now, close your eyes if you'd like. Let the noise fall away. We often think of ourselves as the beginning, the first species to ask, the first to build, the first to gaze into the dark sky and feel small. But the Earth is old. So old that even the word ancient feels too young. For over 4.5 billion years, this planet has turned. And during all that time, layers have built up. Not just layers of rock, but layers of possibility. So many that sometimes it feels almost naive to believe we are the first to wonder. We build civilizations and they vanish. We leave behind stone, glass, rust, and digital traces. But even those may not last. Rain, heat, wind, tectonic breath. They all conspire to soften the marks we leave behind. In just a few thousand years, nature reclaims everything. In a few million, even our greatest monuments could become nothing more than unremarkable sediment. So we ask ourselves, if another species had risen long before us, where would the evidence be? Maybe they didn't build cities like we did. Maybe their tools weren't made of steel, but of something organic, something that time digests without complaint. Maybe they didn't leave bones in places we've thought to dig. Maybe they lived in eras we haven't yet found, buried under kilometers of shifting earth or vanished into oceanic trenches where memory goes to sleep. You see, we forget how easily history disappears. The fossil record is not a complete book. It's a handful of torn pages from an impossibly vast library. Whole worlds may have come and gone between those pages. We think we see the full picture, but we are only looking through a keyhole. And the keyhole keeps changing. There are isotopes in ancient rocks that whisper of long-lost climates. There are unexplained chemical layers in sediment that raise more questions than they answer. There are stone formations that resemble tools, but could also be the work of erosion. We don't know. Not because there is no evidence, but because the evidence is faint or speaks in a language we no longer understand. Sometimes we imagine an earlier species, not necessarily more advanced, but different, slower, maybe more in tune with the rhythms of the earth. Maybe they saw no need to conquer the land, only to observe it. Maybe they left behind no pollution, no obvious scars. And maybe that's why we can't find them. Not because they failed, but because they succeeded in blending back into the planet's memory, as though they had never been here at all. What if curiosity isn't unique to us? What if somewhere in the Devonian, or earlier still, a different mind wondered where the stars came from, or why leaves fall, or what happens after death? Not a human mind, not even a mammalian one, just a mind, alive, aware, and quietly asking questions we still don't know how to answer. Perhaps that's all consciousness is, a pattern that reemerges now and then, like ripples on a pond that keep returning, even after the stone has long since sunk. It's a quiet thought, a comforting one, even, to imagine that the universe keeps trying to know itself, again and again, through different voices, different shapes. Maybe we are not the first chapter. Maybe we're not even the middle. Maybe we are a footnote in a story that started long before us, and may continue long after we're gone. And yet, we look for traces. We dig. We scan. We theorize. We hope that something left behind, a tool, a footprint, a change in atmospheric composition, will prove we were not alone in our wondering. But the earth keeps its secrets well. She folds time into stone and lays silence over the past like a soft blanket. And when we press our ears to the ground, What we hear is not always clear. Sometimes, it's just the sound of our own breathing, echoing through the dark. Still we ask, not because we expect an answer, but because asking connects us to something bigger, to a lineage of questions that may stretch back farther than we can imagine. And if we are not the first to wonder, then what else might we not be the first to do? Could it be that memory itself, the urge to record, to observe, to reflect, has been here before? And if memory has returned again and again, what might it have left behind? And if the earth can remember, how does it choose what to forget? And yet, if this much can be lost, what else might we have forgotten? Somewhere beneath our feet, under roots and water tables and silent compression, lie the folded pages of the earth's oldest stories, not written in ink, but in layers of stone. Each one pressed down by time, sealed by pressure, and curled into itself like a closed book, unreadable at a glance, but never truly erased. Rock holds memory longer than bone, longer than fire, longer than architecture, longer even than myth. While rivers shift and forests burn and languages vanish, the crust of the earth simply waits, not timeless, but deeply patient. And somewhere in that patience, there are secrets, not because they were hidden, but because we forgot how to look. There are mountains that were once seabeds, deserts that used to bloom, and canyon walls that carry the colors of a vanished atmosphere. These are not metaphors. These are records. Stratigraphy, the science of layers, lets us read the history of rainfall, extinction, and oxygen itself. Like turning back the pages of a journal we never knew we were writing. But even the best-kept diary smudges over time. Plates shift. Continents collide. What was once clear becomes folded, cracked, pushed miles beneath the surface. Geology is not still. It is slow, which is different. Like an old librarian gently reshuffling the shelves, losing the order but not the meaning. Just because we can't find a chapter doesn't mean it was never there. The oldest rocks on Earth are over 4 billion years old, ancient enough to remember the first oceans, the first atmosphere, the first breath of anything resembling life. But they don't speak easily. Their words are mineral. Their sentences span epochs. And yet, we have learned to listen. Isotopes locked inside zircon crystals tell us about the temperature of the early planet. The way certain elements decay acts like a ticking clock, radiometric dating, a kind of whispering hourglass embedded in stone. Through it, we've seen mass extinctions come and go. We've seen supercontinents break and reform. We've seen ice swallow the land and melt away again. But we've also seen gaps. Whole spans of time missing, unconformities geologists call them. Places where erosion has taken entire chapters and ground them into dust. No fossils, no layers, just silence. And in those silences we wonder, what stood here before the page was torn out? Because sometimes, even the absence feels deliberate. There are regions where the rock beneath our feet is strangely smooth, as if it was scraped clean, not just by glaciers or rivers but by time itself. And maybe by something else. Not because we know what, but because the pattern of what's missing feels too consistent, too precise. And there are formations that don't quite make sense. Sandstone pillars shaped like spires. Caverns with acoustic properties too perfect to be accidental. Ridges that mirror constellations no longer visible in our sky. Are they natural? Probably. Almost certainly. But certainty, like stone, erodes. So we return to the layers. We dust. We date. We interpret. We find trilobites in limestone that used to be ocean floor. We find charred plant fossils in basalt, where volcanic fires once swept. We find pollen from trees that no longer grow. Each find, a sentence. Each layer, a tone of voice. Each silence, an ellipsis. And the deeper we dig, the more the planet seems to murmur. Not loudly, never clearly, but like someone dreaming, half remembering themselves. Because the earth is not just made of rock. It is made of memory. Layered memory, compressed memory, selective memory, memory shaped by pressure and fire and time. And like our own minds, it forgets. Not entirely, but enough to leave us always wondering what might have once been clear. It's strange to think that some of the clearest evidence of deep time is right beneath our homes, our roads, our cities. That the very ground we walk on holds stories older than language, stories we rarely think to ask. But when we do, the answers arrive slowly, like echoes returning from a vast canyon we cannot see. And if rocks remember floods and ferns and falling ash, what else might they remember? What memories lie too deep to reach, or too strange to recognize? Could the stone remember a thought, if it were old enough? Could it record not just life, but the shape of how life once imagined? And if even rocks can forget, what does that say about us? What have we mistaken for silence? What have we mistaken for stone? And if the earth is a library, who was it written for? Or perhaps, who wrote it? If the earth is a book, it has authors we do not know. Some were rivers, some were volcanoes, and some may have had hands or something like hands. Minds, perhaps, not like ours, but capable of leaving something behind. Not a story in words, but in patterns, in residue, in the strange byproducts of fire. Most of what we call fossils are familiar: teeth, shells, bone. The remains of animals that once swam, walked, or flew. But there is another kind of fossil, one that's harder to classify, one not shaped by biology, but by energy, not grown but scorched. These fossils are not of life, but of processes. Heat-glazed surfaces, unnatural alignments, chemical stains that shimmer strangely under light. We call them tektites. Tiny glassy droplets formed when something hits the earth with unimaginable force. A comet, an asteroid, maybe even a deliberate explosion. They form instantly like frozen lightning. Natural, yes, most of the time, but not always easy to explain. And then there are the black mats, charcoal-rich layers scattered across the continents, often lying just above or below extinction boundaries. They smell of burning, they taste of carbon, and sometimes they come with microscopic spheres, iron, nickel, and other metals melted into perfect roundness. It's a signature of heat, not campfire heat, not wildfire heat, but temperatures so high they liquefy rock. We find them buried under the soil across North America, in parts of Europe, even in desert basins where nothing grows now. Always about the same age, around 12,000 years ago, just as the last ice age ended and many large species vanished. Some say it was a comet, others say a solar flare, and a few wonder if it was something else entirely, because some remnants don't fit neatly into what we expect from nature. Geopolymer-like substances in sedimentary rock that resist erosion unnaturally. Strange alloys embedded in stone with no clear industrial explanation. Layers of fused sand where there is no evidence of volcanic origin, as though something intense, focused, and sudden touched the earth and vanished again. We hesitate to call these artifacts. We choose words like anomaly, feature, irregularity. But the question remains, what kind of event leaves behind not bones, but intention? Not tools, but temperature? Could fire think? Could intelligence, once lost, leave only heat in its wake? There are sites, controversial, quiet, sometimes dismissed, where the soil contains hints of transformation. Places where magnetic patterns flip subtly in the dirt. Where the distribution of elements suggests a furnace once burned hotter than any lightning strike. Yet no volcano, no meteor crater, no mine explains the residue. We search for tools, for ruins, for writings. But perhaps the real traces aren't shaped like hammers or tablets. Perhaps they're more subtle. The rearrangement of minerals. The presence of isotopes in unnatural ratios. The signature of thought not written in language, but in chemistry. Imagine a civilization not like ours that never built high, never quarried stone. One that understood energy and chose to speak through heat. Not destruction, but creation. Not cities, but reactions. And when it was gone, it left behind no monuments. Only glass. And if we found that glass, would we recognize it for what it was? Some scientists have joked that if humanity disappeared today, the only thing we'd leave behind for the deep future might be a layer of plastic and a thin line of radioactivity. A technofossil. The fossil of industry, not life. So we ask, has it happened before? Could we be walking on the burned-out layer of a prior intelligence? Could those glassy beads and carbon mats be their version of fossilized bone? Of course, we don't know. We are cautious. We should be. The Earth is full of strange coincidences. Fire and pressure can do many things without needing a mind to guide them. But even so, we wonder, because curiosity doesn't always need confirmation. Sometimes, it simply needs the quiet thrill of a possibility. A pattern that might mean something. A black layer that doesn't quite belong. A structure too regular, too clean to dismiss without hesitation. The past is not always visible in the shapes of animals. Sometimes it's hidden in the chemistry of ash. And when we hold these fragments, these beads, these mats, these inexplicable seams, we're not just holding history. We're holding questions. Questions burned into the earth itself. Questions about what fire remembers. Questions about what thought might look like if it never left behind a face. And if some ancient fire did think, what was it dreaming of? And what else might we find? If we learn how to listen not to the stone, but to the soot. If we imagine ourselves far in the future, not as who we are now, but as something new, something evolved or replaced. And if we were to dig through the layers of this present moment, what would we find? What would survive us? Would we find a spark plug mistaken for a sea urchin? A circuit board reduced to an accidental pattern in shale? A smartphone no longer sleek, but fossilized, indistinguishable from a polished river stone? Technofossils. That's the word some scientists use for these possibilities. Artifacts of human industry that may persist long after memory is gone. Plastics, metals, synthetic compounds, the slow litter of progress. They don't breathe, but they endure. They don't decay the way we do. And if the earth swallows them, they may become part of its deep layers, pressed into future geology like amber once held insects. Could the same thing have happened before? Could we be finding technofossils now, but misreading them as ordinary mineral patterns, strange nodules, or just noise in the record? It's easy to forget how much nature imitates design. Diatoms build silicate shells with intricate symmetry. Coral constructs vast structures that rival our cities in complexity. Fungi form underground networks that carry information between trees. Intelligence, it seems, is not always mechanical. Can be quiet, woven, submerged. And technology, perhaps, is not always built. It might be grown, or shaped by chemical logic, or bound into something we can no longer recognize. What if a past intelligence never used metal at all? What if its tools were organic, living, or temporarily bound to its own body, and vanished entirely when it vanished? In that case, we wouldn't find skyscrapers or satellites. We'd find anomalies, unusual iron deposits arranged with odd regularity, magnetic fields embedded in rocks where no natural source exists, microscopic lattices that resemble modern composites, but appear millions of years too early. Not because they're impossible, but because we weren't ready to see them. And if we did see them, if we found something unmistakably artificial but impossibly old, would we even recognize it? Or would our instinct for natural explanations erase the anomaly before it could speak? Because we interpret the past through the lens of what we expect to find. Bones, tools, charcoal. But we rarely look for memory etched into structure itself. There are materials today, polymers, alloys, carbon fibers, that won't decompose for tens of thousands of years. Some may last longer, locked in the anaerobic hush of mud or ice. We've built data drives etched in quartz, storage encoded into synthetic DNA. A civilization working with similar materials, or better, could have left behind a message, and we may be walking over it, mistaking it for a strange kind of rock. And then there's the boundary between technology and biology, a boundary that softens the deeper we look. A bird builds a nest. An ant cultivates fungus. A beaver builds a dam. Are these not technologies in their own way? Extensions of intention, embodied thought. So we ask, does it matter if a machine was built from steel or from flesh? Would we still call it a tool if it left behind no gears, no wires? Only a pattern in the dirt, a path etched through the forest, or a curious disruption in sediment that doesn't match the surrounding age? Maybe we're not looking for relics of a civilization that mirrors ours, but one that moved through the world differently. One that built no towers but shaped rivers. One that carved no stone but altered soil. One whose only remaining evidence is a change in the chemical memory of the planet. A sudden bloom of isotopes, a thickening of a particular clay, an unexpected absence of decay where there should be rot. Not absence as in void, but absence as in intention. The kind that looks like a choice. What if the Earth once bore the fingerprint of something thinking, something building, and we've mistaken it for coincidence? What if a field of strange rock we once walked across without pause was, in fact, the crumbled foundation of an idea? What if that layer of metallic dust wasn't debris, but design? We don't know, but the future will ask the same of us. Someday, long after we are gone, something else may dig through the sediment of this age. It may find layers of plastic hardened into limestone, glassy shards from melted cities, radioactive veins glowing faintly in the dark. And it may wonder, was this life? Was this intelligence? Or just a chemical accident? It may stand on our fossils and wonder what we meant. And if we are hard to understand, then so perhaps were they. So we keep digging, not just into the earth, but into our own expectations, into our assumptions of what thought must look like and how memory should endure. Because the past is never only what we find. It is also what we fail to recognize. And if recognition is the only true form of memory, what might we be forgetting, even now? Time doesn't forget, it erodes. It doesn't wipe things away all at once. It doesn't sweep the board clean. It wears things down. Slowly, silently, a grain at a time, a whisper of dust carried off on wind. A layer of soil pressed tighter under new roots. A shoreline dissolved by the hush of waves. Over millions of years, even the most deliberate of marks begins to vanish. Not because the world is cruel, but because it is in motion. Constant, cellular motion. The kind that doesn't shout. The kind that doesn't stop. The kind that smooths everything back into silence. That is the paradox of deep time. It keeps everything but shows almost nothing. We think of time as a line, but it isn't. It folds. It twists. It buries one thing beneath another and reshapes it so completely we no longer recognize the shape. Stone becomes dust. Dust becomes sediment. Sediment becomes rock again. In each layer, the past is both preserved and disguised. Entropy is the quiet engine behind all of this. The tendency for things to fall apart. For order to dissolve into disorder. A house becomes rubble. A skeleton becomes sand. Pattern becomes noise. Entropy is not chaos. It is the soft, inevitable fading of structure. And the longer the time, the more complete the fading becomes. Even our greatest technologies, left alone, will return to the elements. Steel rusts. Plastic cracks. Glass shatters. Digital memory is the most fragile of all. Lost in decades if not preserved. In 1,000 years, our cities might look like hills. In 1,000,000, like bedrock. In 100 million, like nothing at all. And if something long before us wanted to disappear, time would help it. Happily, gently, because time doesn't just erode. It absorbs. It incorporates. It makes what came before part of what is now. A ruin becomes a hill. A crater becomes a valley. What was once the sharp edge of a blade becomes a smooth pebble in the corner of a streambed. We think we can find everything if we just dig deep enough. But there are entire worlds that no longer leave a trace. Civilizations, if they were light, efficient, subtle, might not have scarred the earth the way we do. They may have lived in balance with their surroundings. And when they were gone completely. Because in geology, even catastrophe is subtle over enough time. A mountain range can rise and vanish without a scream. An ocean can disappear without a tombstone. And something vast, something intelligent, something real, might have once existed between two now adjacent layers of rock, only to be compacted, smeared, erased. We find fossils only in rare conditions, when the body was buried quickly, preserved perfectly, and left undisturbed for millions of years. But how often does that truly happen? For every fossil we find, there are countless lives that left no mark at all. Now imagine a civilization trying not to be found, or simply not imagining anyone would ever look. If they moved lightly, if they used materials that decompose completely, if they lived near coastlines that are now submerged, if they buried their waste or recycled it into soil, if they existed for just a brief breath of geological time and then ended not in war or fire but in forgetting, how would we know? We might stand directly over them and see only grass. We might drill past their memory without recognizing it. We might catalog their remnants as natural anomalies or unexplained formations, then move on, unaware we just brushed the edge of a vanished world. That's the humility deep time teaches us. Not everything that was will be known. Not everything that matters leaves a mark. And sometimes, the most significant stories are the ones that faded cleanly into silence. So we ask again, if so much can disappear, what kinds of truth are simply no longer detectable? What kinds of lives could have passed through this planet, quiet as wind? And if absence is the natural resting state of all things, how do we even know what to look for? Perhaps the trace is not in the thing itself, but in the pattern of its erosion. Perhaps we learn to see not the object, but the shape it left behind. Perhaps the deepest mysteries lie not in what survives, but in how completely something could vanish and still change the world forever. We tend to imagine endings as loud, cities burning, towers falling, screams lost in the wind. But not every civilization ends in fire. Some end with a whisper. Some end with a choice. Some dissolve so gently into the fabric of the earth that nothing of them rises again. Not because they failed, but because they were finished. And when all the noise is gone, does that mean they were never there? Or could silence itself be the final artifact? There's a certain kind of quiet that feels hollow, the silence of abandonment, of collapse. But there's another kind, softer and less tragic, the silence of completion, of something that fulfilled its shape and laid itself down willingly, not erased but concluded. In deep time, the difference is nearly impossible to see. The earth does not measure tragedy and triumph. It only records change. Stone layers don't reveal whether a people were extinguished or simply moved on. The record is the same. A shift in sediment, a sudden absence of ash, a fading trail of isotopes. Something was there, then it wasn't, and we, looking back through layers of time, must ask, was this the silence of loss or the silence of mastery? A civilization in balance with its world might leave no ruins, no scars, no towering monuments. The structures might return to soil. The technologies might dissolve. Its memory might be carried not in objects, but in currents, in seeds, in patterns too subtle for us to detect. And when it ended, if it ended, the record might show only stillness. No fire, no collapse, just the end of a rhythm. We have come to associate progress with permanence, with size, with noise, with disruption. But perhaps the highest form of intelligence is not to dominate, but to disappear, to understand when enough is enough, and to vanish without destruction. Would we recognize that in the rock? Would we even think to look? In a quiet stratum of clay, untouched by soot or storm, there might lie the memory of such a civilization. Not in ruins, but in the absence of erosion. Not in bones, but in the slow accumulation of balance. A moment where entropy paused, not stopped, never stopped, but slowed, held in place by intention. And we might miss it entirely, because we're trained to look for collapse, for ruins, for chaos. But what about harmony? What does it look like in the geological record when a civilization leaves quietly? Perhaps it's a sudden drop in industrial residue. A long, flat stretch of sediment with no spikes of pollution, no anomalies, no violence. Perhaps it's a forest regrown over centuries, its roots erasing every trace. Perhaps it's just a layer of clean silt, unremarkable, undisturbed. Silence. Not because nothing happened, but because what happened needed no monument. It's possible that some civilizations long ago discovered what we still struggle to accept. That true mastery lies in vanishing well, in leaving behind not a graveyard, but a garden. Not a scream, but a song so soft it returns to silence. And yet, silence is difficult for us. It resists interpretation. It offers no narrative. It asks us to sit and listen and imagine what might once have been without proof. But maybe that's what the earth is inviting us to do. Maybe the stillest layers in the crust aren't empty. Maybe they're full. Full of decisions we can't decipher. Full of endings we've mistaken for nothingness. Full of quiet minds that knew how to go without taking too much with them. So when we dig and find silence, no debris, no chaos, no traceable fall, we should pause. Not because there's nothing there, but because that might be the point. What happens when all noise ends? Maybe something was perfected. Maybe something let go. Maybe the most advanced civilizations don't leave ruins. They leave room. And if that's true, then what else might be buried in that silence? What else have we passed over, too quiet to be heard? And what other endings, beautiful, deliberate, and whole, lie sleeping beneath our feet? Somewhere, layered in mudstone and shale, the sky is buried. Not the stars, not the blue, not the wind, but the sky as it once was. A sky that fell. A sky that changed. A sky that rained down messages not in words, but in ash and silence and silt. The earth, being what it is, caught every drop, compressed it, sealed it, and now that sky waits in the rock, like a fossil made of air. There are layers in the crust so fine, so precise, they resemble pages in a book. Thin bands of black, pale seams of clay, stripes of soot, scattered with tiny glass spheres. These aren't ordinary sediments. They are skyfall signatures, traces of moments when the heavens descended. Sometimes it was fire, a comet breaking the sound of time, a meteor dissolving in the atmosphere, sending shockwaves and flame across whole continents. We found the evidence. High levels of iridium, rare in the crust but common in asteroids. A sudden spike, too abrupt to ignore. The line it forms is thin, just a few centimeters, but it marks the death of an age. The dinosaurs never saw it coming. One day the sky darkened. Ash rained down. The temperature dropped. Photosynthesis slowed. Food chains collapsed. In some places, we can still find the soot, gently pressed between older stone and newer silence. And then there's the air itself, trapped in bubbles inside ancient ice, or held in the crystal lattice of minerals that formed under pressure. Fossilized atmosphere, time capsules of breath. They tell us when the planet choked, when carbon rose, when oxygen dipped, when something invisible turned into a reckoning. We think of extinction as an end, but it's also a signal. The Earth doesn't just hold bones. It holds the echoes of skyborne trauma, the whisper of ash from distant volcanoes, the glass beads of cosmic impact, the quiet math of oxygen isotopes shifting with each passing era. Each of these is a message, a chemical sentence, a buried memory, and sometimes they come in patterns, tektite fields, scattered over wide areas, shaped like rain that came too fast, too hot, black mats, sudden layers of charcoal, marking a burn that moved faster than any fire we know. Soot traces in soil strata, consistent across regions separated by oceans. What caused them? Was it always nature? Almost certainly, but almost is a soft word. It leaves room for coincidence, for possibility, for patterns we don't fully understand. Because not all ash comes from volcanoes, not all glass comes from meteors, and not all silences come from storms. Some may have been written by something else. Not because we have proof, but because the shape of absence is sometimes too elegant to ignore. We wonder if the sky has fallen more than we know, if whole chapters of atmospheric change, sudden, vast, and lethal, have been quietly layered into the earth while we weren't looking. If every now and then, the sky writes itself into stone. And when it does, it doesn't just bring destruction. It brings renewal. After the dinosaurs fell, mammals rose. After each ice age, forests bloomed. Ash feeds soil. Pressure creates diamonds. Even after the darkest layers, something begins again. Perhaps that's the most haunting part. that the sky can fall and the earth will still turn, that entire civilizations, natural or otherwise, can vanish and the clouds will still return to their drifting paths. We may never know how many times this has happened, how many skies have fallen, how many breaths have been sealed into rock and forgotten, but the record is there in quiet layers, in pale stripes of clay, in the isotopic fingerprint of a world reshaped, not gone, not erased, just waiting, waiting to be read, waiting for someone or something to ask again what happened here, why did the sky turn to glass, and perhaps, who was watching when it did? Maybe nothing, maybe no one, maybe the sky fell, and the clouds burned, and silence rolled back over the earth like a blanket. But even if no eyes were watching, even if no minds were left to remember, the atoms did. Because atoms remember what minds forget. They don't record in sentences or symbols. They don't leave behind tools or tablets. But they store the truth in ratios, in quiet imbalances that no erosion can erase. In the gentle lean of oxygen isotopes toward one form or another. In the ghostly residue of carbon, sulfur, strontium, lead. Each isotope is a subtle storyteller. They don't tell us what happened exactly, only that something did, something changed, something shifted, and the record has no emotion, no bias, no forgetting. When the temperature drops, the oxygen in water molecules shifts slightly. O superscript 1 evaporates more easily than O superscript 1. And when glaciers form, they trap the lighter isotope, leaving the oceans heavier. That ratio is preserved in ancient shells, in corals, in layers of seabed silt, like a planetary thermometer written by creatures that didn't know they were writing. And we can read it now. We can trace the slow breath of the planet. Ice ages coming and going, warmth returning, then fading again. We can see cycles tens of thousands of years long. The wobble of the Earth's axis, the tilt of its seasons, the exhale of methane, the sigh of trapped carbon, the long, deep pulse of climate that forgets us, even as we try to measure it. But not all isotope shifts are gradual. Some are sudden, violent, inexplicable. In certain places, we find sharp spikes in carbon-14, abrupt enrichments in sulfur or nitrogen, traces of beryllium-10 layered into polar ice. These don't speak of slow geological processes. They suggest something else, a disruption, a burst, a moment. One such anomaly occurred around 774 AD. A global increase in radiocarbon, sharp, immediate, and still unexplained. Perhaps it was a solar flare, a gamma burst, or something stranger. The sky didn't fall that time, but the atoms noticed anyway. They adjusted their balance like a breath held too long. And some anomalies are far older. Buried in the sediment from the Permian extinction, when 90 of marine species vanished, we find a mystery in carbon isotopes. A sudden rise in light carbon, suggesting a massive methane release. A warming spike so intense it redefined the biosphere. But what triggered it? Volcanism? A cascade of climate feedbacks? Or something we haven't yet imagined? These aren't just numbers. They're fingerprints, not of individuals but of events. Events that didn't leave bones or fire. Events that may not have left anything, but imbalance. And that's what isotopes are, quiet imbalances, slight leanings, invisible tilts, like a whisper spoken into the structure of the universe itself. There are uranium signatures in some layers that suggest nuclear processes. Not man-made, but perhaps not entirely natural either. In Gabon, Africa, a 2-billion-year-old natural fission reactor once ran underground, self-sustaining, self-contained. A reminder that nuclear complexity can arise on its own. But still, we ask, what if somewhere, somehow, a non-natural pattern lies buried, mistaken for geology but carrying intention? What if the anomalies are not just events, but artifacts? Not in the way we understand them, not tools, not objects, but conditions. Curated outcomes. Moments shaped, not stumbled into. Could isotope records contain messages? Could someone or something have once known how to speak in ratios? To alter the chemistry of time? to write history not on paper or stone, but into the very building blocks of matter. It's a strange idea, speculative, soft at the edges. But when we look at the data, there are places where the curves break, where the numbers bend without warning, where the pattern whispers this was not like the others. Maybe it's coincidence, maybe it's error, but maybe it's memory, the kind too deep to be erased, the kind that only atoms can carry. And if that's true, if something did leave behind a signature in the balance of particles, would we ever recognize it for what it was? Or would we, as we so often do, file it away as anomaly, tuck it into a chart and move on? Atoms remember. They don't forget. But we do. And sometimes the only way to remember again is to listen to the smallest voices, the ones without form, without mass, without name, the ones that spin quietly in place, leaning just enough to suggest something happened here. And if we learn to read that lean, what else might we begin to see? We might begin to see the shapes water leaves behind. Because water carves history in silence. It doesn't ask permission. It doesn't rush. It moves softly, persistently across time. A river can remember more than a monument. A current can erase but also reveal. And when it leaves, when it dries up or retreats, it often leaves something behind. A hollow, a curve, a labyrinth of stone worn thin by patience. In deserts and cliffs we find channels that no longer flow, fossil rivers, ghost paths of vanished streams, dry beds whose curves look too precise, too elegant to be random. Some are natural, most perhaps, but not all of them feel that way. There are sandstone walls with perfect angles, stair-step layers, echoing chambers. Wind and water can do much, but sometimes the structure feels like it once served a purpose. Not a ruin, not a house, but something more ceremonial, more distant. Something shaped not to shelter, but to remember. We walk through them today and call them slot canyons or weathered formations. And perhaps they are. But what if they were also something else? What if they were read, or sung to, or traced by hands we no longer know how to imagine? Because water doesn't just erode, collaborates. It can follow the path of intention and sharpen it. It can soften a design until only its ghost remains. And when those designs are found in stone, in remote gorges, cliffside hollows, submerged terraces, we're left to wonder whether the earth alone shaped them. And then, there is the sea. 70% of Earth is ocean. And sea levels have not always been where they are now. At the end of the last ice age, the waters rose over 120 meters. Whole coastlines vanished. Islands became myths. And any structure that stood near the shore, any memory carved into coral, into limestone, into beach rock, would now be far beneath the surface, hidden in the slow drift of silt and shadow. Divers have found steps where there should be none. Walls submerged too deep to be modern. Carvings in reefs seemingly arranged. The most famous is off the coast of Yanaguni, Japan, a massive, terrace stone formation with right angles and staircases, now claimed by the sea. Most say it's natural. Sandstone fractures, erosion under pressure. And that may be true. But even so, the possibility lingers, because symmetry draws our eye. And when we see it underwater, in places where the sky used to touch the shore, we can't help but ask, was this shaped? Was this guided? And if not, then why does it still feel so familiar? Perhaps our minds are tuned to patterns. Perhaps we see meaning where there is only wind and wave. But maybe, just maybe, some of these places were once known, touched, remembered, used. And then, as the seas rose, as the climate shifted, as time wrapped its arms around the world again, they were forgotten. But the stone remained, softened, blurred, but not erased, just enough to ask a question. We might never know which lines in rock are accidental and which were born of memory. We might never confirm whether a river once cut a path on its own, or whether it flowed through a channel already waiting for it, built not by machines but by hands that worked with the land, not against it. But when we find these labyrinths, we pause, because water does not forget the terrain it has touched, and stone does not resist the story, even if it doesn't speak it aloud. Somewhere, buried beneath silt or buried beneath interpretation, there may lie a purpose we have overlooked. Not a ruin, not a tool, but a way of remembering that does not need to be decoded. Only felt, liquid memory, carved not into books, but into basins, not into maps but into curves. And perhaps that's why we still visit these places. The dry canyons, the underwater terraces, the valleys that hum with old erosion. Not to solve them, but to stand inside them, to feel what they might have once meant. And if that meaning is gone, then what else might water have taken with it? What else flowed away, too quiet to trace? What kinds of memory leave no inscription, but remain in the shape of the world? Perhaps the answer lies not in what was carved, but in what was worn away. Wind wears down stone slowly, but not mindlessly. It finds the weaknesses, the edges, the grain. It moves across landscapes with patience and purpose, though not one we easily recognize. To the eye it seems random, but to the rock it is precise. It knows where to press, where to polish, where to wait. And sometimes, when erosion has finished its quiet work, what remains is not a ruin, but a form. Something unexpectedly symmetrical. A shape that evokes intelligence, not because it was built, but because it has been revealed. There are places on Earth where the line between geology and design begins to blur. Balanced stones that seem to defy gravity. Arches too clean, too smooth, too perfectly proportioned. Faces that emerge in cliffsides, as if nature is remembering a dream it never meant to share. Step-like terraces carved by millennia of rain. Caves shaped like halls. Mountains that mirror pyramids. We call them natural wonders. And they are. But sometimes we wonder, are they only natural? Could it be that erosion isn't simply destruction? Could it be a form of unveiling? We tend to think of time as a thief, taking, dissolving, stealing detail. But what if, in rare cases, it becomes a sculptor? What if the process of wearing something away eventually reveals a deeper intention? Something hidden beneath layers of age, something softened into clarity. There are structures across the planet that inspire quiet confusion. Not because they're clearly artificial, but because they feel too deliberate for randomness. The Giant's Causeway with its endless hexagons. Uluru rising solitary from the desert like a monument. The Eye of the Sahara, a spiral visible only from above. Science explains these things in terms of pressure, chemistry, fracturing, uplift. And yet, the human mind lingers, because design is not always proof. But it is a question shaped into stone. Could someone or something have once used these formations? Not built them, perhaps, but chosen them, shaped them subtly, enhanced what nature had already begun. Not with machines, but with time, with knowing. A shallow groove added to an existing line. A shelter carved where erosion had already opened a door. A pattern traced onto a wind-smoothed wall. Repurposing. A kind of collaboration between intention and erosion. And then, when the people or the beings who knew what they had done were gone, the process continued. The wind kept polishing. The rain kept carving. And the line between what was added and what was natural blurred until it vanished completely. All that remains now is the shape. A shape that doesn't ask to be believed, only to be considered. Because erosion, in its long silence, may carry more intelligence than we think. It selects, it exaggerates, it erases carelessly, but also carefully. And in its wake we are left with something haunting, something open-ended, something that might once have been part of a larger vision or might still be. Perhaps there are places on Earth that were once sacred because of their shape, or became sacred because of what their shape revealed. Not because someone built them from scratch, but because someone recognized them, responded to them, whispered back. And if intelligence once moved with nature instead of against it, perhaps it used erosion as a brush, a tool, a slow kind of memory keeper, not to immortalize but to suggest, not to instruct but to invite. And what if some of the most mysterious shapes on Earth aren't evidence of what was done to the land, but of what the land agreed to reveal. Not everything needs to be planned to be meaningful. Not every wonder needs to be intentional to feel wise. And sometimes intelligence lives not in the hand that carves, but in the eye that recognizes what is already there. So we look again, at arches, at pillars, at towers of layered stone rising from the dust. We walk through their shadows and wonder, were these always only weather? Or are we looking at echoes of hands, of thoughts, of choices, worn down until only the outline remains? And if erosion can erase, and reveal, and collaborate, then what else might it be hiding? And what else, with time, might it be trying to show us? Beneath our feet lies a world we rarely think about. A world not of silence, but of pressure, of slow currents and hidden scars, of ancient upheaval and planetary breath. The mantle, not the crust, the brittle outer skin of Earth, but the vast churning layer below. Deep enough that time behaves differently, heavy enough that memory sinks and stays. The mantle holds secrets not in stone, but in motion. It flows, though not like water. It rises and falls like breath slowed to a crawl, hot rock cycling over tens of millions of years. And within those currents, there are echoes, remnants, shapes that should not be there. Some scars were made by physics, the collision of continents, the birth and death of ocean basins, the sinking of tectonic plates deep into the earth, where they melt slowly into the whole. But some patterns, some heat signatures, some magnetic anomalies do not fit so neatly into the known. There are regions beneath the surface where temperatures spike more than expected, where heat wells up in columns, rising straight from the boundary of the core. Plumes, we call them. Some feed volcanoes. Some simply exist, suspended, waiting. But in a few cases we find something else. Hints of metal. Not in but in unusual concentrations. Dense, localized zones of iron and nickel, sometimes shaped in lines, sometimes scattered like debris, sometimes buried so deep they would never have formed naturally in that way, not at that depth, not at that angle. Could they be fragments? And if so, fragments of what? Some scientists wonder whether Earth's past includes impacts larger than we've admitted. Planet-sized collisions. Events that scattered metallic cores like splinters into the mantle. Others wonder whether what we're seeing is even older, the shattered remains of protocrusts from a world that predated this one entirely. But there is another possibility. A softer one. Quieter one. What if some of these anomalies, some of these deep, unmoving signatures, are not the remnants of chance, but of choice? We assume that intelligent life must leave its mark on the surface. Cities, roads, satellites. But what if it went deeper? Not for extraction, not for conquest, but for memory. What if something once lived here, not above ground, but within, and chose the mantle as its archive? Not as a vault, but as a medium. After all, what better place to leave something permanent than in the part of Earth that never sees the light of erosion? Where wind cannot reach and rain never falls. Where change comes slowly, but shape can still endure. There are places, still unexplained, where seismic waves behave strangely, where sound travels faster, or slows, or scatters more than expected. These regions are often vast, irregular, and unusually stable. We call them LLSVPs, large low-shear velocity provinces, and they lie at the base of the mantle just above the molten core. Some geologists think they are relics of ancient subduction. Others propose they are planetary leftovers from Earth's violent youth. But what if, in some impossible way, they are something else? Not alive, not even artificial in the way we think of machines, but shaped, guided, put there, maybe not by hands, but by minds, or if not shaped, then at least used, as signals, as anchors, as geological markers placed so deep they could only be read by those with the tools and the patience to listen across deep time. Sounds like fantasy, but the more we map the interior of the Earth, the more complexity we find. Not noise, not chaos, but geometry, repetition, form. And if the mantle carries echoes, then maybe some of those echoes are not accidental. Maybe something tried to speak through pressure, to whisper through heat, To leave behind a question, not on the surface where it would be lost, but deep within, where it might endure long enough to be found again. We think of history as something written in ruins, but maybe the most lasting stories are written in motion, in heat, in balance. And if something did leave its voice in the mantle, then perhaps what we call anomalies are not mysteries at all, but memories. Compressed, hardened, hidden by design, waiting for us to see not with eyes, but with instruments, with questions, with curiosity stretched thin enough to reach that far down. And if we can listen closely, what else might we hear rising from the center of the earth? Not as sound, not as light, but as presence, a trace of thought folded into the body of the world. But what happens when that thought begins to fade? Decay is not disorder. It is transformation. It is the slow unweaving of structure, the quiet surrender of form back into the ocean of possibility. Things do not vanish. They change shape. They loosen. They scatter. And often, as they do, they reveal something deeper. A pattern. A rhythm. A kind of music played in reverse. Because patterns don't vanish, they fade into other patterns. A building crumbles, but its symmetry lingers in the foundation. A leaf withers, but its veins still mirror the trees around it. Even a dying star, collapsing into itself, leaves behind traces of its once bright geometry in the dust it sheds. Entropy, the tendency of systems to move toward disorder, is not chaos. It is a process. It follows rules. And in that process there are steps, transitions, shapes that recur. Fractals are one example. The way branches divide. The way lightning forks. The way coastlines repeat their ragged edge no matter how closely we zoom. These are not designed, not in the way we design cities or machines. But they feel intentional. They carry the scent of order. And sometimes, they outlive the thing they belong to. What if decay itself, this soft undoing, is a kind of signature? Not a name, not a date, but a trace of structure that once made sense, of something that held shape long enough to leave a ghost behind. We find these ghosts everywhere, not spectral but mathematical, in coral reefs bleached by time, still echoing the geometry of growth, in ancient architecture weathered into ruin, yet still obeying ratios we can feel, even if we don't measure them, in the distribution of craters on moons, in the spiral of galaxies, in the erosion lines on temple stones whose builders are long since vanished. It's as though the act of fading leaves behind a fingerprint, not in what was built, but in how it dissolved. Some thinkers wonder if civilizations, including our own, might leave behind this kind of echo. Not ruins, not objects, but decay patterns, ratios, residues, entropic fingerprints, a distribution of elements too precise to be random, a slope of breakdown that suggests choice, a fragment that, when mirrored, fits into a pattern that should have been lost. Imagine a world where a great structure once stood. Now it's gone, collapsed, but the distribution of its remains, the distances between pillars, the angles of the fallen walls, still obey a logic. A grid no longer visible, but still influencing what remains. Would we recognize that? Or would we call it erosion and move on? Because we are surrounded by decay. Even now, our own systems are unraveling slowly. Technologies becoming obsolete. Materials breaking down. Records fading. But in how they fade, there is still design. Still code. Still echoes of the hand that placed them. Could the same be true for a species that came before? One that understood entropy not as an enemy, but as a tool. What if they encoded their memory not in permanence, but in pattern? A pattern that would only emerge as things fell apart. Like a song heard clearly only when played backwards. Like a spiral visible only in the ashes. We sometimes say that nature forgets, but perhaps it remembers differently than we do. Not in permanence, but in repetition, in ratios, in curves that emerge again and again, long after the original structure is gone. Like the golden mean in flower petals, or the echo of ancient rivers in the layout of dunes, or the decay of isotopes tracing a memory older than bones. Maybe what lasts is not the thing itself, but the mathematics behind it. And maybe those mathematics, when found in unexpected places in unnatural combinations, are the only hints we'll ever have of forgotten minds. Not proofs, just whispers, soft inclinations, ghosts in geometry. And if we learn to see the world not as static, but as recursive, as a place where everything falls apart in familiar ways, then we may begin to spot the intentions that once guided those falls. Not every collapse is a failure. Sometimes it is choreography, a final dance of structure giving way to shape. A civilization may not leave behind monuments, but it might leave behind an algorithm, a code not to preserve knowledge, but to ensure its rhythm echoes long after the words are gone. And if entropy always increases, then how, we must ask, might intelligence have worked with that truth, not against it? What else might be hiding in the patterns of decay? And what forgotten minds might have whispered their memories into the mathematics of falling apart? Some didn't whisper in numbers. Some wrote in stone, because rocks remember. We just don't always know how to read them. Across valleys, deserts, and high places where wind meets silence, stones stand. Some are carved. Some are placed. Some are shaped into lines, circles, spirals, maps, stories. We call them petroglyphs, megaliths, dolmens, markers, altars. But these are names we've given from the outside. The truth lies within the texture, the alignment, the stubbornness of granite set to watch the sky for thousands of years. Long before paper, long before language as we know it, long before the idea of history, there was stone. And into that stone someone pressed meaning. Not always in words, not always in pictures, sometimes just in presence. A ring of stones on a cold hillside, a carved spiral that matches the movement of the stars. A face half buried, weathered into near absence, yet still looking toward the solstice sunrise. We don't know who made many of these things, or why, but the memory they carry is not passive. It calls, tugs. It suggests something was known, something vast, perhaps even obvious to its makers, and only we have forgotten. There are patterns in these carvings that repeat across continents. Spirals, grids, concentric circles. Found in Ireland. Found in New Mexico. Found in the highlands of Peru and the desert plateaus of Central Asia. Not identical, not copied, but somehow resonant, as though different hands were answering the same question, or remembering the same truth. Sometimes the stones align with celestial events. They frame sunsets and solstices, moonrises and eclipses, as if the builders were not just placing rock, but synchronizing memory with the sky. This is not random. This is not erosion. This is memory calibrated to light. We often speak of ancient people as primitive, but those who carved these stones understood cycles that we've only recently begun to rediscover. Lunar nodal rhythms, Venus synodic periods, solar calendars woven into stone shadows. And yet, there is more. Some megaliths defy easy explanation. Massive stones moved with precision, from quarries miles away, without modern machines. Some are carved in ways that would be difficult even today, fitted so closely that a knife blade cannot pass between them. Not just functional, but beautiful, intentional, confident. What were they for? We propose temples, observatories, burial sites, but maybe they were something else entirely. Maybe they were records, not of facts, but of perspectives. Not history, but memory. Because stone lasts. It resists decay. It holds a shape through seasons, through centuries, through floods and fire and forgetting. But it does not speak in our tongue. It speaks in placement, in texture, in the long pause between intention and erosion. And we have barely begun to listen. It's easy to walk past a carved boulder and see nothing but weather. To glance at a stone circle and see only ritual. But if we ask not what it meant to us, but what it preserved for them, we begin to feel something more. A pattern that transcends culture. A reverence for stillness. A belief that meaning can be held in silence. And perhaps a warning that memory must be placed where it can endure. that what matters most should not be buried in books or etched into silicon, but written into the body of the earth itself. Because paper burns, screens go dark, but stone waits, and when we touch it, when we press our palms against its surface, we're not just touching matter. We're touching the residue of thought, of care, of attention that has lasted longer than any name, and maybe longer than any species. Could it be that some of these stones are older than we think? Could it be that some were remembered, reused, adapted, carried forward by people who no longer knew who first placed them, but still felt they were sacred? Could we be the inheritors not just of tools and bones, but of alignments, of memories carved before language, still functioning quietly, catching the light at the same moment every year? And if that's true, then what else have we misread as landscape? What else have we called geology, when it was once geometry? Perhaps memory was never meant to be fast. Perhaps it was meant to endure, etched not in words, but in weight. And stone, after all, does not forget. But water remembers differently, not in stillness, but in motion, not in carvings, but in depth. Beneath the waves may lie what time refused to bury on land, not because it survived above the surface, but because it was pulled beneath it, preserved not by erosion, but by drowning. We forget how often the ocean has risen, and how far. At the end of the last ice age, as glaciers melted and ancient climates shifted, sea levels surged more than 100 meters. Coastlines were redrawn, valleys became gulfs, rivers became bays. Entire stretches of land vanished. Not in a day, but over centuries, silently, as the water climbed higher and higher, without haste, without reversal. And if people had once lived there, if anything had, what would be left now? The seabed does not invite us in easily. It holds its secrets beneath mud, silt, and pressure. It rearranges things, but it also shelters. In some cases, the ocean may have preserved what the wind would have carried away. Roofs collapse, wood dissolves, but stone endures. Alignments endure, questions endure. Divers have found strange things under the sea. Step-like terraces where there should be no architecture. Walls too regular to be entirely natural. Rectangular formations, wide and low, like the foundations of something vast that no longer breathes. At Yonaguni, off the coast of Japan, lies one such place. Submerged, silent, and fiercely debated. Is it natural? Is it carved? Was it ever meant to be seen again? We don't know. We may never know. But Yonaguni is not alone. Across the world, in shallow waters near ancient shorelines, there are shapes that resist easy explanation. Off India's coast, in the Dogger Bank beneath the North Sea, off the coasts of Malta, Greece, Cuba, all in places that were once dry, once lived on, once part of the everyday rhythm of an older earth. And the question we keep asking is not just what is down there, but who? Because if civilizations once rose on coasts, and they likely did as we do, then many of their stories now lie beneath the waves. Most human history has unfolded near water. Rivers for drinking, oceans for food and travel, coasts for warmth and trade. But water is not loyal. It retreats, it returns, it claims. And over time, it has taken much. What we find now is fragmentary. Pottery buried in marine silt, ancient roads submerged, harbor stones where no ships now sail, and occasionally formations that feel older. Not just lost cities, but lost intentions. The suggestion of minds we no longer recognize. Could entire cultures have slipped beneath the sea before memory formed? Could the earliest architects have built along shores that no longer exist? We often assume that we know the bounds of ancient civilization. But our maps are drawn from what is visible, what is dry, what is reachable. And the ocean is none of those things. It is deep. It is veiled. It is slow to give up its past. But when it does, we are reminded that history is not a line. It is a tide, and tides return. Perhaps some of the myths we carry, of sunken lands, of lost kingdoms, of golden ages drowned, are not inventions but memories. Faded, rewritten, half recalled. The way dreams echo through water, blurring even as they come into view. Plato wrote of Atlantis not as legend, but as history. Others told stories of cities swallowed in a day. We dismiss them, but the earth is older than our disbelief. What else might lie beneath us, blurred not by imagination, but by sediment? Could there have been languages spoken along vanished shores? Could stones, aligned with stars now changed by precession, still rest on sea floors, waiting? Could memory itself be buoyed by water, floating just beneath the surface of what we accept? We don't know, but we search, with sonar, with divers, with questions. We scan the sea for echoes, for structure, for symmetry. We follow hints of pattern beneath the currents. We look for the impossible, and sometimes we almost find it. And when we do, we are not just uncovering the past. We are remembering how much can be lost without being erased. How much might wait beneath the waves, patient and intact, seen only by fish and light filtered through salt. How much of our own future might already be mirrored in the silence of what sank before us. But some silences are older still, older than stone, older than language or hands or bones. There was a time long before forests, before shells, before creatures with eyes, when the earth was ruled by chemistry. Not the oxygen-rich atmosphere we breathe now, but something denser, darker, stranger. Methane, hydrogen, ammonia, a haze where sunlight barely reached the ground, and life, if it existed, was hidden in the warmth beneath the crust, or drifting through warm, shallow seas unseen. And we ask, what if intelligence looked nothing like us? We tend to imagine minds as reflections, upright, carbon-based, symmetrical, aware. But what if thought is older than those constraints? What if cognition, the ability to adapt, to sense, to shape, once took a form we no longer recognize? Not with skin or speech, but with chemistry? Before oxygen, Earth belonged to methane. Microbial mats dominated the ocean floors. They fed on gases we would find poisonous. They built strange, rubbery colonies, layered in color and texture. And in those layers we find the earliest fossils, not of bodies but of behavior, movement, reaction, coordination. Some call this the beginning of life. But what if it was more? What if, before complex cells, before spines, something already understood its environment? Not in thought as we know it, but in awareness, in decision, in something close to will. Could a civilization form in such a world? Not with tools or structures, but with gradients, feedback loops, chemical language, the slow computation of life built from gas and heat. It sounds impossible, but life is not required to resemble what we see now. And intelligence, true intelligence, may not require neurons. It may only require complexity, a sustained memory, an ability to respond, to shape, to anticipate, and perhaps to leave behind no trace at all. If something once lived in Earth's methane-rich past, it may have decayed without a whisper. No bones, no artifacts, nothing to fossilize, just a subtle rearrangement of the atmosphere, a chemical shift, a period of balance, perhaps, followed by disappearance. And if we were to find it, how would we know? We study isotopic anomalies, sharp changes in carbon ratios, unexplained shifts in sulfur. We wonder if a great bloom of methane-consuming organisms once altered the entire planet's chemistry. Some of these shifts are sudden, abrupt, not evolutionary, event-like. Were they extinctions, or something else? Some thinkers suggest that such changes could be artificial, not in the technological sense, but in the intentional sense. Directed, managed, as if a system arose, lived briefly, and then collapsed, not from failure but from completion. A methane civilization would not build temples. It would not write or farm or burn. But it might manage temperature. It might control gas flow through microbial cooperation. It might develop feedback systems, chemical computers of sorts, spread across oceans, operating beneath awareness, but no less intelligent for their silence. And then, when the environment changed, when oxygen began to rise, when the chemistry of the earth turned hostile, it would vanish, not in violence, not in catastrophe, but like mist dissolving in light. No ruins, no fossils, only a layer in the sediment where the ratios bend, where something happened we cannot explain. And perhaps something once alive breathed deeply through methane and moved slowly through heat. It built no towers but shaped currents, told no stories but stabilized cycles. It evolved not toward sight, but toward balance. And then it ended, forgotten not by time but by the assumptions we carry about what intelligence must look like. Maybe we weren't the first. Maybe we were simply the first to burn, to dig, to shout. And before us came something quieter, a mind that rose in warmth and gas, a mind that did not need to last forever, only long enough to shift the balance, a mind we may never find, except in the tiniest tilt of ancient chemistry. And if such a civilization existed, alien, invisible, irretrievable, then what else might we be missing? What other forms of intelligence pass through the world without leaving monuments? What kinds of memory dissolve without a trace, but still shape everything that comes after? And what if we are not alone in this epic either? What if something breathes beside us now? Not in oxygen, not in words, but in forms we still don't know how to see. And what if something once did? Long before humans, before mammals, before forests and flowers and flight, the earth was filled with lives we no longer remember. Not just animals, but entire ecosystems, breathing systems, sensory networks, quiet balances that made the world sing in ways we will never hear again. Some of them ended gently over time, but others vanished all at once. Extinction is not rare. It is rhythm. It is punctuation in the long sentence of Earth's history. There have been 5 major ones that we know of. 5 mass extinctions where something shifted so violently, so quickly, that most of life was swept away. We remember them by names now: the Endordovician, the Devonian crash, the Great Dying, the Triassic close, the Chicxulub event. But names are only labels. Beneath them lie mysteries that refuse to stay quiet. And perhaps something more. Every extinction erased not just creatures but perhaps civilizations too. Not cities, not nations, but organized, adaptive systems that may have touched the world more deeply than we realize. We begin with the worst. 250 million years ago, something happened. We call it the Permian-Triassic extinction, the Great Dying. Over 90 of marine species disappeared. Forests collapsed. Oxygen levels plummeted. The Earth's temperature soared, and the atmosphere thickened with carbon and methane. Volcanoes had poured fire across Siberia. The oceans had turned acid. Something in the balance had broken. And yet what else was lost? The fossil record doesn't tell us what was thinking, only what had bones, shells, teeth. What if some of the systems that vanished were not animals but intelligences, ancient, distributed, unrecognizable? Minds that bloomed in coral labyrinths or across interconnected microbial beds. Minds that spoke not in sound but in chemistry. Minds erased without ceremony. And then came another. 66 million years ago, the sky fell. The Chicxulub impact, a name now synonymous with endings. A 10-kilometer-wide asteroid struck what is now Mexico. The blast vaporized life for hundreds of miles, sent a shockwave through the Earth's crust, and threw enough debris into the sky to end an age. We speak of the dinosaurs, of the dust that lingered, of the plants that died, and the mammals that rose in their place. But what else was lost? What dreams, what balances, what subtle partnerships between life and world? And more curiously, what if something saw it coming? If a species had evolved intelligence, not industrial, not expansive but quiet, it might have understood cycles. Patterns in the sky, shifts in the Earth's rhythm. Perhaps it knew the end was near. Perhaps it tried to preserve something. Perhaps it tried to leave a mark. And perhaps that mark lies buried beneath layers of soot and shocked quartz. Just one more silence in a planet full of them. Even smaller extinction events, the pulses, the intervals between, raise questions. Sudden drops in biodiversity. Anomalous chemical signals in sediments. Charcoal-rich layers from global fires. Sometimes we know the cause. Sometimes we don't. Sometimes the cause is debated for decades, while the evidence softens with age. But always what remains is the trace, the absence, the ghost shape of something that no longer moves. And while we search for fossils, for artifacts, for bones, maybe we should also be asking what it means for a mind to vanish completely. What kind of intelligence would leave nothing behind? What kind of civilization would dissolve not into ruins, but into soil? Could extinction erase a species that never built, but remembered? One that never mined, but observed? One that never conquered, but understood? Maybe extinction events are not just planetary resets. Maybe they are endings of stories that were never written down, only lived. Stories that never asked to be remembered, but still mattered. And if that's true, then what does it mean for us? Because we are not immune. Our own extinction, if it ever comes, may not be marked by fire or ice, but by forgetting, by silence, by a layer of plastic and metal particles, barely thick enough to notice, then sealed forever in mud. And one day something else may ask, what else was lost here? What else might have lived before the ash? Who else once looked up? The earth remembers through absence, through gaps, through scars. And in every extinction layer, there may be more than just death. There may be memory, soft, faded, unspoken, but waiting. That's what the earth does best. It waits. And in that waiting, it forgets or appears to forget. Not because the memory is gone, but because it is hidden, compressed, rearranged, and sometimes simply missing. We walk through ancient rock and find gaps, not voids but silences, and we fill them with stories, with guesses, with the shape of what might have been. But beneath all of it, beneath the carbon, the bones, the sediment, there lingers a truth we too often forget. Absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. It is a phrase repeated in science, but not always believed. Because we trust what we can touch, what we can see, what we can label. But the fossil record is not a complete account. It is a series of accidents. To become a fossil is rare. To be buried in just the right way. To escape decay, scavengers, fire, flood. To be caught in the perfect balance of pressure and time. It is not the fate of most living things. It is a fluke, a fragile preservation. And even then, we do not find them all. Of all the humans who have ever lived, how many have left fossils? A fraction of a fraction. A whisper in the geological choir. Now stretch that thought across millions of years. Across continents. Across oceans that rose and fell and swallowed coastlines whole. How many traces would survive? And more importantly, how many would we ever find? Because to find something is to know exactly where and when to look. To dig in the right layer, in the right region, at the right depth, in the right mood of the earth. And even then, we might miss it. A few feet off. A few meters deeper. A wrong assumption in the dating. A misclassification. It is easy to imagine that what we have found is all there is. But the lie of absence is a gentle one. It tells us we've seen enough. That the silence is final. And the earth, in its quiet way, allows that illusion to continue. But there are places where it slips. Fossils found in strata once thought barren. Human ancestors dated far older than expected. Footprints where there should be none. Artifacts out of place. Not often, but enough to remind us we do not know everything. And our timeline is always incomplete. Now imagine a species that came long before us. One that did not bury its dead in formal ways. One that lived near the coasts now drowned. One that decayed differently. That used materials not meant to last. One that left few bones or none at all. How would we know it existed? What would we look for? And if we found nothing, would we believe that nothing was ever there? That's the danger of absence. Convinces us that the question has been answered. That the silence is proof. But bones are not the only trace of life. Carbon lingers in strange places. Tools may degrade, but the changes they make, to soil, to flow, to light, may echo longer than their creators. A field tilled once may change the way plants grow for centuries. A fire set deliberately may alter the chemistry of a layer. A mind, even if lost, may still bend the shape of what remains. We must remember that the Earth's crust is not a library. It does not organize memory, scatters it, and sometimes it hides what matters most under layers we don't think to check. So when we dig and find nothing, we should not close the book. We should look again, not just deeper but differently, because absence is not nothing. It is possibility. It is the shape of something that once was just outside our reach. And if we learn to treat silence as a clue, not a conclusion, then what else might we begin to notice? What questions might we reopen? What forgotten voices, not lost, but quiet, might begin softly to return? And what if we were never listening in the right way? We search for messages in stone, in bone, in pigment and carving. We look for tools, symbols, artifacts, things shaped by hands. But what if a civilization once spoke not with form, but with frequency? What if they didn't write with ink, but with radiation? Not with alphabet or clay, but with pulses, wavelengths, invisible structures of light? What if knowledge itself once traveled not through paper or walls, but through fields, broadcast, refracted, encoded into the ambient hum of a world tuned to listen? There are materials, even now, that can hold information in ways we're only beginning to understand. Crystals that store data in refracted light. Atoms that carry memory in their spin. Oceans of information, written not across space, but through vibration. It sounds impossible, but even we have begun to experiment with such things: quantum communication, optical storage, neural interfaces that translate thought into wave. So we ask, what if others came before and spoke in such forms naturally? Not advanced in the way we mean, with metal towers and glowing screens, but fluent in energy, in resonance, in something closer to light itself. Such communication would leave no fossils, no inscriptions, no ruins. It would pass through stone without resistance. It would echo across water. It would bind minds through patterns we cannot detect or no longer recognize. And if such a system ever existed, it would vanish cleanly. Nothing would remain, except perhaps a trace, not in the earth, but in the air, in the background noise of the planet, in the irregular hums we sometimes dismiss as error, the frequencies that seem to come from nowhere, the whispers in radiation, in harmonics, in unexplained bursts of sound in deep ocean and high atmosphere. We've recorded signals from space, brief, patterned, unrepeated. We've heard the earth itself produce music, slow, seismic waves vibrating like breath. Could something, someone, have once spoken this way? Could they have encoded memory into light? We forget how much life depends on frequency. Birds navigate by magnetic field. Whales sing in tones that travel thousands of miles. Even plants respond to vibration, leaning toward sound as they do toward sun. Communication does not require language. It requires pattern, rhythm, recognition. And if a civilization emerged that understood this not as science but as instinct, they may never have needed to build. They may have grown their signals, shaped their world not through architecture, but resonance. They may have tuned themselves into the Earth's frequencies, using light, magnetism, heat, gravity, to share, remember, preserve. And if they did, how would we know? Could they have left behind harmonics embedded in minerals? Could certain rock formations still carry traces of their songs? Could the aurora once have been a kind of message, not visual but encoded? We've seen what standing stones can do to sound, how they focus, bounce, amplify. Perhaps some structures were not built to be seen, but to be heard, not through ears but through fields, through skin, through the quiet pulse of something else. And perhaps we've walked through their conversations without ever knowing. There is poetry in the idea that memory could exist without mass, that knowledge could shimmer, not rest, that communication could be woven into the very energy of a place, invisible, weightless, persistent. And if such systems were real, then they were never meant for us. But that doesn't mean we can't notice them, or wonder about them, or dream, softly, that the earth still hums with messages from a world before words. Maybe one day, a new kind of listening will reveal something we missed. pattern, a rhythm, a light that flickers not from stars, but from the ground beneath our feet. And in that flicker, a message, not in language, but in invitation, to pause, to feel, to remember that not all memory is buried. Some of it drifts, some of it glows, some of it is still speaking in frequencies too soft for ears but not for wonder. And perhaps it is wonder, not tools, that makes us begin to read again. Because Earth, for all its silence, is not unwritten. Its crust is an archive, deep, unhurried, and astonishingly detailed. Every river that ran, every drought that dried, every leaf that fell and was forgotten. These are not lost. They are layered, compressed into strata, one upon another, held close in sediment's long sleep. Each layer is a line, each mineral a memory. We read them slowly, the way you read an ancient script. Not with fluency, but with feeling. We trace the color shifts in stone, the fine silt trapped between flood pulses, the chemical breath of long-vanished air locked inside porous grains. And here, within the sediment, we find the possibility of something else. Not a story as we expect it, but a disruption, a hesitation in the pattern, a line that does not flow with the ones before or after. Because for all its chaos, geology is rhythmic. It repeats. It layers steadily, like the rings of a tree or the pulse of a tide. But sometimes that rhythm breaks, suddenly, sharply. And when it does, the stone remembers that too. A layer rich in soot out of place. A mineral concentration that should not exist in that time. A boundary that divides two worlds too completely. Geologists call them anomalies. They explain them as volcanism, impact, rapid climate shifts, and often they're right. But sometimes the disruption carries more than just physical change. Carries intention, or the ghost of it, as if something interfered. We look at the KPG boundary, the layer of clay between the Cretaceous and Paleogene. It stretches across the world, thin and fine, rich in iridium, an element rare on Earth but common in asteroids. And within that band lies glass spherules, shocked quartz, and the still faint scent of a vanished sky. We know the story: Chicxulub, impact, fire, but the layer feels almost too clean, like a line drawn in a book, punctuation mark, a page turned. And elsewhere, in even older rock, we find other disruptions. Strange shifts in isotopes, unusual metals, sudden appearances of materials that do not belong in the environment around them. Some explain it as natural anomaly. Others wonder, could it be ancient interference? Not dramatic, not obvious, but subtle. A hand that reached down and turned a page early, or folded the corner, leaving a mark for later. Maybe it was life. Maybe it was thought. Maybe it was only the planet dreaming, adjusting itself in ways we do not yet understand. But the layers are not passive. They speak, not in symbols but in sequence, a rhythm broken, a signature hidden in repetition. And if we listen long enough, we begin to feel the quiet possibility that not all stories in the sediment are natural, that some may be unnatural regularities, order where randomness should reign, design where only pressure should be. We've seen repeating pulses of extinctions. We've traced alignments in magnetic records. We've discovered isotope shifts in deep cores that seem purposeful, not explained, just present, just waiting. And the question becomes, what would a message look like if it were written into sediment? Would it be language? No. It would be pattern. It would be a sequence unlikely to occur by chance. A harmony of elements. A regularity of intervals. Not enough to prove, but enough to ask. And that's what the sedimentary archive offers us. Not conclusions, but openings. Pages that refuse to lie flat. Stories that might have been edited. Layers that might remember more than mere erosion or deposition. Because the Earth is not just a surface. It is a memory device, slow, massive, patient, and within that patience, something else may rest. A message, presence, or just the gentle suggestion that not everything we see is only natural. Some of it may be remembered intention. Some of it may be the residue of thought too old to name, and some of it may still be unfolding beneath our feet. But what if it's not unfolding? What if it's returning? We imagine history as a line, forward-moving, building always toward something greater, higher, brighter. But the earth doesn't move in straight lines. It circles. It wobbles, pulses. Its climates, its coastlines, its magnetic fields, all of them loop. And we, who emerged from this circling world, may not be exempt from its rhythms. What if civilizations don't build upward, but loop? What if intelligence, instead of rising like a tower, turns back on itself, again and again until it becomes silence? Entropy, the second law of thermodynamics, tells us that all systems tend toward disorder. Not out of chaos, but because order takes energy. Structure requires maintenance. And over time, energy spreads. Structures soften. Heat fades. This applies to stars, to planets, and perhaps to minds. Every civilization we've known has followed a curve. Emergence, growth, complexity, and then collapse. Sometimes the fall is fast. War, famine, catastrophe. Sometimes it's slow erosion, forgetting, abandonment. But always there is a return. To simplicity, to soil, to a kind of quiet that feels final, until the next rise. And perhaps this is not failure. Perhaps this is pattern. A cycle written into the thermodynamics of thought. Because thought, like heat, is not free. It must be fueled. And the more it builds cities, systems, networks, tools, the more fragile it becomes. More interdependent. More demanding. Until the smallest disturbance is enough to send it cascading back down. Entropy at work. Not punishing. Just balancing. What if, across deep time, intelligence has bloomed more than once, not only in humans but in others? What if they too built, reached, asked, explored, and then quietly dissolved? Not in violence, not in tragedy, but in inevitability, and left behind a very little, a warmer atmosphere, a strange mineral, a pattern in the sediment now barely visible, and the illusion that we are the first. Because we mistake the quiet after collapse for the absence of what came before. We assume the ruins have vanished entirely, when in truth, they've been absorbed. The forest grows over the road. The city returns to dust. The record is rewritten not in books, but in wind. And we, standing now in our own arc of progress, in satellites and fiber optics and digital breath, imagine that we are different, that we will not fall, that our path is linear. But even now, we feel the friction, energy slipping, balance tipping. We see the cycle and still we call it growth. But maybe it is return. And if intelligence is part of nature, then perhaps it must obey the rules of nature, including the rule that nothing can remain ordered forever. We may not like it, but it may be beautiful. A civilization that rises, learns, remembers, and then forgets. So the planet can breathe again. So something else can begin. Or perhaps so the same thing can begin once more. Not a spiral upward, but a loop. An echo. A breath. And in that loop we find humility. We are not the first. We may not be the last. We may not even be alone in this pattern. Just one more cycle of sentience, destined not to conquer time, but to be folded gently into it. To become sediment. To become silence. To become possibility once more. And if that's true, then what does progress really mean? Is it survival? Is it memory? Or is it learning to leave gently? To rise without destruction? To fall without despair? To become part of the loop without needing to break it? The earth has done this before. It may be doing it now. And if the end is not failure, then what else might the next return become? Or what might already have returned and gone again? Not all life rises in stone. Some of it comes from mud, from clay, from the dark softness at the bottom of things. Ancient lakes, bogs, and river mouths, places where the earth forgets to be hard, and instead becomes something more like skin. It was in places like these that life once stirred. Warm, shallow, quiet, pockets of liquid chemistry waiting for a spark. And in those pockets, Long before spines or shells, the first memories may have formed. Not in minds, not yet, but in molecules. Loops of information, self-replicating patterns. Early thoughts too faint to name. What if consciousness bloomed and faded like seasons? What if minds have come and gone not once, but many times, emerging not from forests or fire, but from clay? We think of intelligence as permanent, as linear, as something that accumulates. But perhaps it's more like weather, or music, or tide. Perhaps when the conditions are right, when the temperature shifts, when the ice retreats, when nutrients mix in the perfect ratio, awareness arises. Briefly, quietly, then dissolves again, carried off by flood or frost, leaving no monument behind. Only altered chemistry, only silence that feels slightly different. Between ice ages, the earth breathes, glaciers shrink, wetlands swell, the clay warms, loosens, opens, and life rushes in. Not just bacteria and mosses, but something else, something layered, responsive, capable of sensing its own short life, of learning, adapting, even reflecting. What if, in those narrow interglacial windows, whole systems of intelligence unfolded? Not for millennia, but for centuries, or less. What if minds once bloomed beneath the surface of a marsh and faded before the ice returned? We would find no bones, no tools, only a thin layer of altered soil, a patch of clay richer in phosphorus, a hint of something once active, once organized, now gone. It's possible, because bogs preserve what deserts erase. In some places we've found ancient human footprints pressed into peat, still visible, still soft. Elsewhere, we've found entire bodies, skin, hair, even expressions, preserved for thousands of years in cool, anaerobic mud. If this is what remains of a single person, what might remain of a mind? A network? A civilization made not of stone, but of root and wet memory? Perhaps these minds were brief. Perhaps they never sought permanence. Perhaps they rose with the mist, did what they were meant to do, and returned to the clay without needing to be remembered. Not failure, not loss, only season, only cycle. We know that some microorganisms coordinate behavior in ways that border on thought. Slime molds solve mazes. Bacteria share information. Mycelial networks pulse with signals and responses. These systems are not centralized. They do not need a brain, but they make choices. They respond to change. They optimize. And some scientists believe that consciousness itself may not be unique, only rare. A tendency that reappears when the conditions are right, when systems become complex enough to notice themselves. What if, long ago, something reached that threshold in a shallow pool, lived for a while, understood itself, and then simply fell back into stillness? Not because it failed, but because the world shifted. The temperature dropped. The glaciers returned. The mud grew cold and hard again. And all that thought, all that feeling, all that knowing, dissolved. And now we find only layers. Pale mud, dark peat, thin lines where oxygen dipped and minerals mixed. We think it's only nature, but maybe it was memory. The memory of something that once dreamed. Not like us, not for long, but real, present, complete in its own short rhythm. And if that's true, if intelligence can rise and fall like frost, then what else might be possible? What other forms of awareness might have come and gone between epochs? What minds have vanished? Not in fire, not in collapse, but simply in the natural return of cold. Perhaps consciousness is not a staircase. Perhaps it is a bloom, brief, beautiful, and meant to come again. But before anything returns, it must be remembered. And some memories are buried in ice. Antarctica and Greenland, white and silent, motionless to the eye, are not lifeless. They are not empty. They are not dead. They are machines. Not machines in the way we build them. No gears, no wires, no hum. But machines of memory. Systems of storage. Vast, unblinking libraries of frozen breath, holding the past in crystalline silence. Every snowfall presses the air down. Every winter seals it deeper. And over time, century by century, Mile by mile, the layers grow, compact, compress, distill, until what remains is not just ice, but atmosphere in suspension. Time stacked, sky fossilized, a perfect record of what once was. In the cores we've drilled, we've found air from before pyramids, before mammals, before trees, and deeper still, we find things we don't yet understand. Strange chemical pulses, bubbles with unusual gas ratios, traces of metals that should not be there, ash from distant, uncharted fires. Some say it's volcanoes, some say comets, but some wonder, quietly, what else might be down there waiting to be known. Because the ice does not move quickly, and in its stillness it preserves not just air but evidence of temperature, of trauma, of time, and maybe of intention. If an ancient civilization, human or not, wanted to leave a message, the ice would be the place. Not to hide it, but to protect it, to keep it safe beyond erosion, beyond flood, beyond heat. A deep freeze archive, a vault older than myth. Some even whisper of shapes beneath the Antarctic crust, radial forms beneath the ice sheet, regular patterns now smoothed by glaciers, geothermal anomalies, linear ridges, metallic echoes bouncing strangely in radar. Of course, it could be geology. It likely is. But still, the possibility flickers. Could something have been built before the last glaciation? Could it have been swallowed, not by water, but by snow? And if so, what kind of memory might it be holding now? Not active, not alive, but dormant, like a machine asleep for 100,000 years, waiting only for warmth, waiting for the melt. And the melt is coming. Each year, the ice shrinks, the cores run deeper, the base becomes more reachable, and what lies at the bottom is not just bedrock, but history, a landscape sealed in cold. Not just of climate, but of presence. We tend to think of intelligence as always visible. But what if it was designed to disappear? What if the greatest civilizations knew entropy would come and placed their memory not in stone, but in glaciers? Not to be worshipped, not to be found quickly, but to be preserved. Ice does not rust. It does not burn. It does not crumble with time. It only waits. And in that waiting, it holds everything. The ash of a fire no one remembers, the soot of a sky darkened long before humans, the chemical whisper of a world that once thought and then fell silent. Maybe it's all natural. Maybe it's only Earth recording itself. But even that is extraordinary, because the planet knows how to remember. It has built machines without knowing, and some of them are made of ice. So we return to Greenland. We return to Antarctica. We drill and measure and melt tiny samples, and each time we listen, not for voices, but for signals, for regularities that do not fit, for warmth where there should be only cold, for patterns not of weather, but of choice. We haven't found them, not yet, but the layers are still unfolding, and the melt is not just loss, it is revelation. And if the ice is a machine, what happens when it fully wakes? What else might emerge? Not as artifact, but as memory. What if a signal is already rising, soft, slow, glacial through time? And what might it be trying to tell us? Perhaps not in words. Perhaps not even in symbols. But in heat. Because not all warmth comes from the sun. Not all fire is born from magma. Some heat lingers in places it should not be. Deep inside the earth, sealed in ancient layers of stone. Not rising from the core but caught, trapped in rocks that, by all expectations, should have long since cooled. We call these anomalies, regions where the temperature doesn't match the model, where sediment layers glow slightly warmer than they should, without nearby faults or volcanic history to explain them, where boreholes bring up rock that hums faintly with an internal heat, long after the cause should be gone. Some of these zones are small, local, a few square kilometers of unexpected warmth. Others stretch wider, ancient, deep, and as we map them, as instruments improve and patterns begin to emerge, we find ourselves asking a quiet question. Could this heat be memory? We know that energy leaves a trace. From campfires to combustion engines, From forges to furnaces, heat lingers. It changes the materials around it, alters minerals, bakes clay, reorders atomic lattices. And these changes, once cooled, remain. They become part of the geologic record. A layer slightly fused, a discoloration in the strata, a crystalline shift that whispers, something burned here. And while most of these signals are natural lava flows, metamorphic events, geothermal vents, a few seem stranger. No volcanic source, no pressure gradient, no tectonic history, just warmth. A scar of energy with no visible wound. We have found such signatures in some of the oldest rock formations on Earth, the cratons, stable and ancient, dating back billions of years. Places where the crust has not moved for eons, where the surrounding rock is cold, undisturbed, except for a narrow seam, pocket of heat, as if something once burned there, and then stopped, not exploded, not erupted, just functioned, and then went silent. Some call it deep earth processing, natural fission events, like those found in Gabon's Oklo region, where uranium once triggered a self-sustaining nuclear reaction 2 billion years ago. But others wonder, what if something else caused it? Not natural, not explosive, just industrial. We know that large-scale energy use changes the Earth. Today, we build power plants, drill thermal wells, sink heat into groundwater. We leave a temperature signature, shallow, but growing. What if someone did the same long ago? Not human, not recent, but capable, purposeful. What if an ancient intelligence harnessed heat, not in towers or reactors, but deep beneath the surface, out of sight, out of erosion's reach? And what if the only trace they left behind was temperature? Just enough to warp the crystal grain, just enough to soften the stone, just enough to last, not as architecture, but as presence. And even now, in the quietest chambers of Earth's oldest rock, we might still find that warmth, still measurable, still strange, still whispering, something happened here. Of course, the explanations remain incomplete. Some say these anomalies are remnants of planetary formation. Others propose chemical reactions too slow to see, but science too loops, and sometimes the same questions return in softer tones. What if the heat we find is not random? What if it lines up? What if it forms a pattern? A lattice? A grid? A trace of energy once structured, now only half erased? It's a question we can't yet answer. But the more we search, the more such signatures appear, not everywhere, not often, but just enough. Enough to feel like the Earth remembers something it won't quite tell us. Maybe that's all it is, a hum. A low note beneath the silence. A place where rock still holds warmth it shouldn't. Like a handprint left on stone, long after the hand has gone. And if we could read that warmth, what else might it say? Not in heat, but in intent. And what if intent existed before we even had time to measure it? Because chronology itself is a human invention. Calendars, clocks, seasons broken into hours, millennia folded into stone tablets, histories pinned to years that only we decided were real. But what came before we measured? What kind of memory could have existed before time had names? We tend to forget that deep time doesn't care about dates. The Earth has moved through billions of years without needing to know what century it was. The stars have drifted through sky after sky without asking to be mapped. But even so, we mapped them. We reached upward. And slowly, across deserts and mountains and ice and sky, patterns began to emerge. The moon rises. The moon falls. The stars return. Then drift. The sun shifts its resting place, just slightly, each day. And we, watching, began to remember, not with words at first, but with stones, with shadows, with carved spirals and standing stones that still catch the light in just the right place, long after their builders are gone. This was the beginning of human time. But was it the beginning of timekeeping? Or did something or someone begin the count before us? There are places in the world where myth and measurement blend, where ancient stories describe epochs before history, floods that reset the world, stars that changed their paths, people who lived before people. Not all of it is fantasy. Some of it sounds like memory, long memory. There are carvings, old ones, that appear to mark equinoxes from a sky no longer visible. Celestial alignments that only made sense tens of thousands of years ago. Patterns etched in stone that match the precession of the Earth's axis. A cycle so slow, it takes nearly 26,000 years to complete. Who would mark something that takes 26,000 years? And why? Unless it had been seen before. Unless someone had noticed the drift. Not once, but again and again. Unless time, to them, was not a line but a loop. A rhythm. And what if some calendars weren't meant for humans? What if they were written into the land, or the stars, or the very mineral cycles of Earth itself? Rhythms encoded not in days or years, but in geology, in glacial pulses, in orbital wobbles, in chemical clocks too vast for our current minds to follow. We found hints, ice cores that pulse with warmth and cold, tree rings that thicken in cosmic silence, sediment layers that repeat with eerie regularity, like the planet breathing. And in those layers, something close to memory. Not time as we know it, but time as it was lived, felt, endured. Perhaps long ago, there were observers who did not call it time but still knew its shape. Not with calendars, but with cycles. Not with numbers, but with stars. And maybe they counted backwards. Maybe their sense of time moved in spirals, not increments. Maybe they remembered forward, not backward. Or maybe they didn't count at all. Maybe they only listened. And in their listening they built something, not machines, not monuments, but patterns that still echo in the rhythm of the world. We don't know. But when we look at myth not as fiction but as fossilized thought, a different kind of chronology opens. Time before time. A season before history. A memory that didn't need language because the stars were its script. And the Earth, rotating gently beneath it all, was the clock no one had yet dared to name. And yet, even the stars obey its rhythm. The same law that turns planets, collapses empires. The same force that topples towers, dims suns. Entropy, age, gravity, all of it pulling toward dissolution. Stone, silicon, and star stuff all return to dust. It doesn't matter if it burns in the sky or breathes in a city. Everything collapses eventually, not in failure but in release. We see it in old cities. Roads split, steel rusts, concrete cracks. Nature returns through window frames. Time curls the corners of every monument. We call them ruins, but they're more like echoes. Bone fragments of once living systems. And we see the same in stars. Their cores run dry, their light dims, shells expand, then shed. Supernovas leave behind a scatter of heavier elements, calcium, iron, gold, the bones of stars, scattered across galaxies, waiting to become something else. And sometimes they do. The iron in your blood once belonged to a dying star. The silicon in your phone was forged in a furnace older than Earth. The calcium in your bones was cosmic ash. So we live in ruins. All of us. Ruins of galaxies. Ruins of cities. Ruins of stories we no longer remember how to tell. And yet, the pattern continues. Build, burn, break, return. Cities mimic the universe. Their grids echo constellations. Their lights mirror stars. They grow dense, then hollow, pulse with energy, then fade. If you flew high enough, fast enough, and looked back at Earth through time-lapse, you might see cities flicker on and off like stars, rising in brightness, reaching a peak, and then dimming back into dark. What remains? Sometimes foundations, sometimes roads swallowed by trees, sometimes glass fused into sand again. The materials shift, but the shape of decay is familiar. The loops repeat. And so we ask, is there something universal in the way things collapse? Is there a signature? A rhythm that echoes from nebula to neighborhood? We think of stars as immortal, but they aren't. We think of cities as fleeting, but they leave shadows that last. What if they aren't so different? What if every city is a miniature star, burning resources, producing heat, eventually collapsing into itself? sometimes explosively, sometimes slowly, a supernova in the form of an abandoned skyline. And just as stars leave behind new elements, the seeds of future worlds, perhaps cities leave behind ideas. Not the buildings, not the maps, but the feeling, the intention, the memory of how people lived or tried to live. And maybe that's the real fossil. Not stone, but choice. Not metal, but meaning. And just as galaxies are shaped by what stars once were, perhaps we, too, are shaped by cities we've never seen. Civilizations that rose and fell before records began. Their bones scattered through soil and sky, influencing the next rise, the next bloom, the next breath. In this way, perhaps progress is not forward but fractal, repeating at different scales. A pattern echoed from atom to avenue to atmosphere. And so the bones of stars become cities, and the bones of cities return to stars. But not all cities were made of stone. Some were built from calcium and salt molecule by molecule over thousands of years. Not with intention as we know it, but with presence, with growth, with a kind of logic so slow it resembled stillness. We call them reefs, and we rarely call them civilizations, but perhaps we should. Coral is not a single organism. It is a community, billions of polyps connected through soft tissue, sharing nutrients, reacting to light, to temperature, to sound. A colony that senses as one, responds as one. And what is intelligence if not that? What if collective intelligence once built reefs, not roads? What if the ocean was once home to minds that never needed fire, never needed tools because their biology was already the architecture? No hammers, no books, no language in the air, only growth, layered, self-repairing, cooperative. A reef does not conquer space, fills it, shapes it, creates pathways for other life. It is not a fortress. It is an ecosystem, and yet, in its complexity, there is something more. A coral reef filters information, temperature, current, chemical signals. It adjusts, it adapts, it remembers in its own way the conditions of the past. And some species of coral can clone, can spread, can live for thousands of years. Longer than cities, longer than trees. Perhaps, long ago, the ocean was host to an intelligence that never stood, never walked, but expanded. Perhaps its thoughts were not separate from its body. Perhaps its culture was growth itself, a memory passed not in words, but in pattern, in shape, in the rhythm of branching forms. Could a reef be a city? Could it be more? We tend to think of intelligence as reaching upward. But what if it reached outward? Not in search of dominance, but in search of balance. A civilization that did not extract but absorb, that did not consume but cultivate. And when it was finished, when the waters warmed or cooled or changed just enough, it didn't collapse. Simply stopped growing, leaving behind a monument so familiar we forgot to question it. We study fossil reefs, built millions of years ago. Some span continents, and in their silent skeletal patterns, there may be more than biology. There may be choice, not like ours, not in logic or language, but in rhythm, a coordination of colonies that understood themselves as one. We know that slime molds can solve mazes, that fungi communicate across forests, that bacteria signal each other with chemical language. Why not coral? Why not a reef that dreamed, not of conquest but of form? A civilization that never wrote because it had nothing to forget, that never built because it never broke, that never left behind ruins because the reef was the ruin, alive and fading at the same time. And perhaps it shaped the future without knowing. Reefs changed the chemistry of the ocean. They shaped coastlines. They created homes for others. And in doing so, they altered evolution. Maybe that is intelligence, too. To leave behind not monuments but conditions. Not records but consequences. Not artifacts but fertility. And maybe that's why we missed them. Because we looked for machines. Not minds made of cells. Not memories made of limestone. Not decisions carried out in silence. We assumed that thinking required talking. That creation required tools. That knowledge required names. But what if it never did? What if intelligence once bloomed along the equator, in warm, shallow seas, and instead of monuments, it left behind reefs? And what if we're walking past their cities even now, calling them ruins of biology, when they were something more? Not forgotten, just misread. But some are not even that. Some are not remembered at all. No stars remember the prayers of the extinct. They burned. They built. They hoped, perhaps. They looked upward, as we do, and wondered what waited in the dark. And then they vanished, quietly, entirely, and no constellation shifted to mourn them. There is a special kind of silence in being not only gone, but erased. No names, no myths, no markers left in the sky. We feel it sometimes in ruins without records, in tools with no context, in strange alignments that suggest intention, but carry no signature. Someone was here, but we don't know who. We don't know how. We don't know why they disappeared. And the ache of it lingers. There's a grief in deep time that feels different than other grief. It's not sudden. It's not sharp. It's not even ours to carry. But it rises when we touch something ancient. A carving, a burial, a stone circle weathered nearly smooth, and realize that not only is the builder gone, but so is the story. The sky forgot their names. No one tells their legends. No one carries their line. They didn't become ancestors. They became absence. And yet, there is dignity in that. There is a quiet, haunting grace in disappearing so completely that even the stars look blankly back. Not because you failed. Not because you were unworthy. But because you folded into time so seamlessly that your shape became the land. Perhaps some civilizations never needed to be remembered. Perhaps they lived and loved and ended without needing to echo. We build with permanence in mind, metal, data, archive. But maybe they built only for the present. Maybe the moment was the monument. And maybe that is wisdom we've forgotten. To live not for legacy, but for alignment. To rise and fall like coral, like cloud, like breath. Not resisting decay, but honoring it. We search the skies for signs. We scan for signals, artifacts, echoes of intelligence that might reflect our own. But what if the brightest minds never left a mark? What if they looked up at the same stars, whispered names we'll never know, and simply let go? No broadcast, no bronze, no cry for immortality, just quiet. And what if that's enough? What if the beauty of a civilization doesn't lie in how long it lasts, but in how gently it ends? Not with fire, not with collapse, but with stillness, a fading of stories no longer needed, a soft return to soil and sea, and the sky, unburdened, moves on, not cruelly, just indifferently. Stars don't carry memory. They shine, they burn, and they forget. And maybe that's what time itself is, not a ledger, but a tide. And we are the foam, brief, bright, enough. But what if it wasn't? What if the forgetting was never theirs? What if it was ours? Because the earth forgets, but only because we forgot how to ask. Not that it stopped speaking, only that we stopped listening. We became fluent in measurement, in explanation, in naming. We divided the world into facts and formulas, broke it down into systems and data, and in doing so, we lost something softer. The ability to feel meaning, to sense story, to hold questions without rushing to conclusions. We built the modern mind as a sharp tool. But a sharp tool cannot catch whispers. And the earth mostly whispers. It hints. It repeats. It rearranges the familiar into patterns we've dismissed so many times that we no longer notice them. And so we miss it. We walk over alignments without seeing. We dismiss the strange as coincidence. We cover symbols with pavement. We catalog, label, archive, and move on. The great forgetting didn't happen in a single moment. Crept in, through disbelief, through distraction, through the quiet decision that if something can't be tested, it isn't real. That if something doesn't fit the model, it must be anomaly. That if something is too old to verify, it doesn't matter. But Earth remembers differently. It stores memory in rhythm, in subtlety, in echoes of what once was, shaped not in artifacts, but in relationships. How stone faces the sunrise, how water flows just slightly wrong, how animals still follow paths no longer visible to us. This isn't mystery, it's pattern, and we've been trained not to see it. The deeper we dig into science, the more we find things we can't explain. Materials out of time, alignments too precise to dismiss, erosion patterns that resemble design. But our eyes, trained on the plausible, glaze over. Our hands, tuned to the useful, brush past. And our ears, grown numb to silence, fail to hear what the ground keeps trying to say. There may be stories everywhere. In the tilt of a hill, in the lichen-covered carvings, in the heat of a rock face warmed by a memory we can't name. But we've called them accidents, or myth, or dismissed them entirely. And so they fade not because they were weak, but because we forgot to ask what they meant. The great forgetting is not erasure. It is disconnection. It is what happens when the question dies in us. Not because there's no answer, but because we no longer believe the answer is allowed. And yet, the questions persist. Why do some places feel older than others? Why do some patterns repeat across cultures that never touched? Why do we feel watched in caves but not in rooms? Why do some silences feel full? What if the evidence isn't missing? What if it's waiting? Not in textbooks but in overlooked terrain. In rituals dismissed as primitive. In ruins not yet recognized as ruins. In the instinct we've called superstition, but that once kept memory alive. The earth hasn't forgotten. It's just buried the answers under layers of our own disbelief. And now, as we begin to open again, as science becomes softer, more willing to wonder, maybe we can return. Not with certainty, but with curiosity. Not to prove, just to see. To stand on a windswept hill and ask what stood there. To trace a line of standing stones and wonder what they once heard. To feel the pull of a star not in data, but in the skin. And to remember that remembering is not just about recovery. It's about readiness. It's about seeing what was always there. Waiting. Still. And one day we will be too. Not walking. Not watching. Not building or burning or naming. Just still. Sediment pressed over our cities. Roots curling through our language. Stone forming where our structures once stood. Someday we will be the fossils. Not in bones alone, but in signal, in atmosphere, in trace. And the question whispers back through time. How will we be remembered? Or will we be remembered at all? We often imagine our legacy in monuments, in data vaults, in golden discs launched toward distant stars. But the earth has never kept memory the way we wish it would. It forgets the names. It forgets the words. It forgets the shape of things. What it remembers are scars. What it holds are shadows. A layer of soot. A change in isotopes. A sudden thinning of soil horizons. We leave footprints, yes, but time turns even those to dust. And if a future mind, human or not, were to find us, what would they see? Would they see intelligence? Or simply impact? Would they read our skyscrapers as sediment, our plastics as curious minerals, our satellites as orbiting rust? Would they call us a species? Or a moment? Our brightest thoughts, our poems, our dreams, our digital breath, may vanish faster than we expect. Data decays. Magnetic storage demagnetizes. Servers drown. Satellites fall. Even books, even stone, even metal dissolve eventually. And so we ask, what of us might endure? The carbon perhaps shifted into the soil. The concrete slowly reverting to sand. The technofossils, shards of circuit, fragments of glass, beads of plastic now part of the ocean floor. Maybe that's all. And maybe that's enough. Because to be fossilized is not to be glorified. It is to be translated. And translation always changes meaning. The fossil is not the creature. It is the space it once occupied, filled in by time. Cast. A memory without muscle. So if we become fossils, we become the shape of our absence. We become the gap we once filled. And that, perhaps, is the softest truth of all. that for all our striving to last, to be known, to be remembered, the earth may hold us best not in memory, but in forgetting, in dissolving, in making room for what comes next. Some will call that loss, but maybe it's just participation. Maybe it's the final gift we give the planet, to return to it without a monument, without a signature, without a demand to be understood. Just to be part of the long, quiet layering. To become a breath in the geologic rhythm. To be one more mystery in a world already full of them. And if someone does find us, if they study our remnants, trace our soot, decode our ruins, maybe they'll wonder, as we do, were they wise? Were they kind? Did they know the stars, or only chase them? Did they love what they had, or try to escape it? Did they leave gently, or all at once? We won't get to answer, and maybe that's how it should be, because fossils don't explain. They don't speak, they wait, and in their silence they ask new questions, of whoever comes next. And one day we will be, too, not walking, not watching, not building or burning or naming, just still, sediment pressed over our cities, roots curling through our language, stone forming where our structures once stood. Someday we will be the fossils, not in bones alone, but in signal, in atmosphere, in trace, and the question whispers back through time. How will we be remembered? Or will we be remembered at all? We often imagine our legacy in monuments, in data vaults, in golden discs launched toward distant stars. But the Earth has never kept memory the way we wish it would. It forgets the names. It forgets the words. It forgets the shape of things. What it remembers are scars. What it holds are shadows. A layer of soot. A change in isotopes. A sudden thinning of soil horizons. We leave footprints, yes, but time turns even those to dust. And if a future mind, human or not, were to find us, what would they see? Would they see intelligence? Or simply impact? Would they read our skyscrapers as sediment, our plastics as curious minerals, our satellites as orbiting rust? Would they call us a species? Or a moment? Our brightest thoughts, our poems, our dreams, our digital breath, may vanish faster than we expect. Data decays. Magnetic storage demagnetizes. Servers drown. Satellites fall. Even books, even stone, even metal dissolve eventually. And so we ask, what of us might endure? The carbon perhaps shifted into the soil. The concrete slowly reverting to sand. The technofossils, shards of circuit, fragments of glass, beads of plastic now part of the ocean floor. Maybe that's all. And maybe that's enough. Because to be fossilized is not to be glorified. It is to be translated. And translation always changes meaning. The fossil is not the creature. It is the space it once occupied, filled in by time. Cast. A memory without muscle. So if we become fossils, we become the shape of our absence. We become the gap we once filled. And that, perhaps, is the softest truth of all. That for all our striving to last, to be known, to be remembered, the earth may hold us best not in memory, but in forgetting, in dissolving, in making room for what comes next. Some will call that loss, but maybe it's just participation. Maybe it's the final gift we give the planet, to return to it without a monument, without a signature, without a demand to be understood. Just to be part of the long, quiet layering. To become a breath in the geologic rhythm. To be one more mystery in a world already full of them. And if someone does find us, if they study our remnants, trace our soot, decode our ruins, maybe they'll wonder, as we do, were they wise? Were they kind? Did they know the stars, or only chase them? Did they love what they had, or try to escape it? Did they leave gently, or all at once? We won't get to answer. And maybe that's how it should be, because fossils don't explain. They don't speak, they wait, and in their silence they ask new questions, of whoever comes next, because someone always comes next. Even when we think we're the end of the story, we are only ever a chapter, a layer, a rhythm in a much longer song. And so the question rises again, as it always has, who or what will ask after us? Not just when we're gone, but long gone. When the plastic has crumbled. When the cities have vanished. When even our satellites have fallen into rust or sea. Will there be minds then? Will there be eyes? Will there be something that notices a layer in the rock where carbon spiked, where strange alloys appear, where a global warmth was recorded in the trees? And will they wonder who we were? Not just what we did, but why we did it. Why we built so much. Why we burned so fast. Why we reached for stars and let forests fall. Or maybe they'll ask something simpler. Were they lonely? Because to ask who came before is always a question of kinship. It is the longing not to be alone in time. We ask it now. We have always asked it. As children gazing at the sea. As scientists drilling into ice. As poets standing among ruins. And if asking is what defines intelligence, then perhaps it is the question, not the answer, that endures. So we imagine the next askers. Maybe they will walk. Maybe they will drift. Maybe they will be made of crystal or water or thought. Maybe they will bloom from coral or climb from clay or arrive from elsewhere, not as conquerors but as listeners. Maybe they will look at the earth not as territory, but as inheritance. And when they find us, not us but our traces, what will they know? A ring in the sediment, a fossilized circuit, a whisper of nitrogen out of balance. They may not know our languages, but they will know we were here. And if they ask softly who came before, will we answer? Not in voice, not in monuments, but in the shape of what remains, in the warmth of the soil, in the tilt of abandoned land, in the way rivers were rerouted, or forests paused, or minerals fused in impossible ways. That will be our story, incomplete, unspoken, but present. And maybe, just maybe, they will sit with that story, not rush to decode it, not try to own it, but simply feel it, the way we feel when we find an ancient carving with no translation, or stand beside a ruined temple, open to the sky, or hold a tool shaped by a hand that disappeared before memory began. We feel the weight of it, the loss of it, and the beauty. Maybe they will, too, and maybe they will wonder what we wondered. Were they the first? Did they ask what we're asking now? Did they know they would be forgotten? And maybe, most of all, did they leave anything behind that was meant to be found? Or were they simply passing through? We don't know. We never will. But we hope. And hope, too, is a kind of fossil. A message pressed into the future without knowing who will read it. We hope that if they find us, they forgive us. For what we broke. For what we missed. For what we feared to imagine. And perhaps they'll learn from us. Not through warnings, but through wonder. Perhaps they'll see our chaos and our care, our ruin and our reaching, and perhaps that will be enough. Because maybe, in the end, the loop is the legacy. Not the knowledge itself, but the asking. The way the question keeps returning, through different mouths, different species, different epochs. Who came before us? Were they like us? And who will ask after us? When we are gone. That is the mystery. Not to be solved, but to be carried, like a soft, eternal echo in the memory of the planet.